Do I have sound? Do I have anything? Is anything working? Okay. Can you hear me? Hey, Epi. Hey, Epi, you should know. Okay, can you hear me? Yes. Woohoo. Tim? Chuck? Somebody? Can you? Yes. Okay. So, Epi, I'll have you know, earlier when I logged on, I saw your name there and I started talking to you, and I talked to you for about a minute and a half or so before I realized I wasn't actually streaming. So, I hope at some point through the ether, whatever it is I said to you arrives somehow or the other. All right. But I think that we are only 22 minutes late for this stream. That's a record for us, I suppose. I have no ice in my water, but we are streaming. So today I think we're talking about adventures. We're gonna give it a couple of minutes and let those who wandered off get the notification that we are actually here. Let me look at my notes. Lord of mercy. Somehow I had turned off my streaming thing. I disconnected from Twitch. I don't know how I did that, but it was done, and I have no doubt that I did it. So there you go. Yeah, today we're going to dive into adventures, a critical part of TROLLZAH, a critical part of any role-playing game. Thank you for the subscription, Perry. Who's off? We're going to get these technical issues worked out eventually, so that we just slide right into home plate when we're streaming. I don't believe that, and I suspect it. None of you believe that either. All right, we'll give it about one more minute. Hey, Douglas, how's it going? I had my normal inability to actually get on the stream. Maybe we can avoid that Thursday, get it out of the way Tuesday, so that Thursday when we're back for GM Tricks of the Trade, we're golden and won't have these issues, whatever these issues may be. How's it going, Red Dragon? It's a miracle that we made it. So I was about 2 minutes from shutting her down. All right. Let's go ahead and dive into it since we're so horribly late anyway, and see, just talk about adventures. You know, a few years ago, Goodman Games, Joe Goodman put out a book called, hell, I can't even remember the name of it now. It's something about making good adventures or something, and he had a whole bunch of industry people get in there and kind of write a little essay on what makes good adventures. A really fantastic little resource for those of you who are wanting to dive into adventure writing. It's not completely what we're going to talk about today. We're actually going to kind of dive into two sides to, yeah, that was it, how to write adventures that don't suck. Yeah, that's a very Joe Goodman title. And for those of you who know Joe, he is very, he's very blunt in his speaking. He is one of my favorite people that I have met in this industry. Absolutely love Joe Goodman. So, yeah, I wanted to talk about kind of the place that adventures have in RPG publishing, at least from TLG's perspective. And I know, I've been doing this a little bit, so for a little while, I know that from how it impacts other companies and what adventures are used for. Talking to distributors and whatnot, their value, relative value in the marketplace. And they've changed quite a bit, of course, since I started, and even before to today, though. I think they're kind of shifting. They have the potential to shift back. We'll get into that. And then we're going to kind of follow that up with just what TLG looks for, what I look for as a publisher in adventures, and even how to kind of tackle your own problems when you're writing adventures for your party or for your game or what have you. So without further ado, let's dive right into adventures' impact on the marketplace. So adventures are interesting. They can be a low-cost way to keep a brand alive, and that's really what they are used for mostly. You can do, adventures are small. The revenue generated from an adventure is not going to be huge. It's not going to pay lots of bills or, payroll or any of that. But it can certainly fuel the whole engine, driving fans to other pieces of the game. You can tie something to a book or what have you. Or if the adventure is interesting enough, if the cover is interesting enough, you might get new players who are looking at that at a retail shop or online and say, hey, that looks really cool. What game system is this? And kind of dive into it. So the primary reason that you, as a publisher, that you do adventures is to establish, to maintain a brand. I think that it was years and years ago that Gary Gygax told me that for role-playing games. Now, role-playing games are very, very different than board games. Board games, you make the game and you release it and you hope for the best. It's a much larger market. It's a market that spans into a variety of demographics, and board games are available at a variety of different outlets, from Walmart to online to mom and pop shops to what have you. They're all over the place. RPGs are a little bit different because they're book heavy. I mean, most role-playing games follow the 3-book paradigm. The player's book, the monster book, and the game master's book. And those that don't usually have one monstrous tome. Dungeon Crawl Classics comes to mind. Though they have only one book. The one book is easily as big as the original Monsters and Treasures for CMC and the Player's Handbook combined, with a good chunk of the Capital Keeper's Guide put in there. So what some companies do is they kind of roll them all into one thing. So role-playing games, because of that, because of the way that they're sold in the market, and because of just the sheer volume of rules and the sheer amount of reading, they're marketed completely different. They have a much smaller chunk of the pie. Very few people just want to dive into a game that you've got to read, 150 pages of rules. Even if you take something like Castles and Crusades, wherein everything in the first 20 pages or so that's all you really need to learn how to play the game. A consumer doesn't see that. They pick up the game and they say, wow, I don't know about this. Board games have a much larger footprint, much easier sell to the average, gamer than RPGs do. So what RPGs do, and this is what Gary Gygax was talking about so many years ago when he said, I don't think I actually said what he said, but when he said that to keep a role-playing game alive, you have to constantly publish new material. Now, after first edition, once second edition becomes industry standard to not necessarily do just new material, but to do new editions. And then you see this serious 3 to 5 year paradigm kind of set up where role-playing games die out. They'll come out year 1, do really well. By year 3, they're at their height. By year 4 and 5, they're grinding down to not much left. One of the things that they did in the early days, TSR did in the early days, to keep fueling that. Of course, now they had lots of different versions of Dungeons & Dragons. You had the basic set and the expert set. I think there was an advanced set. There was another set, I know, in there somewhere. Then you had advanced, not the advanced set. There was another box set, 3 box sets, if I recall. But then there's the advanced Dungeons & Dragons, of course, came out. So though Gary didn't believe in editions, he sort of had several editions of his own game when they came out over a 5-year period. And then you get into that serious paradigm. But there was many, many adventures that were published for Dungeons & Dragons that kind of fueled the whole thing. Judges Guild in those days actually kept itself alive off of adventures. That's mostly what they did. A few setting books, like the Invincibles, Overlord, whatever, City State of the Overlord. Invincibles, I can't remember the title. That title had too many things for my tiny brain in it. So going forward, one of the ways you could help keep your brand alive, and it's particularly counted for retail shops, less so once the market shifted into online buying. But in retail shops, the way to keep your brand alive was to publish adventures. So you could do a monthly adventure, or 6 weeks, or 8 weeks, or whatever, so that retailers constantly saw that this was a living game, that their customers could constantly come back once they bought the Player's Handbook or whatever it is. They could come back. So that's what that becomes the major drive for doing adventures. Now it gets tricky because adventures can be expensive. You've got to do new cover art. You've got to do interior art. You've got to do maps. And of course, pay the writer and the editor and the layout. So there's a lot of work that goes into an adventure, but the price tag's not great. So unless your sales are exponentially higher, then the amount of money you're earning from your adventures can be not much, or it can be a loss. So if your adventure isn't kind of fueling the whole the core book sales, for example, Monsters, blah blah blah, then you're kind of just spinning your wheels stuck in the mud, and you can't do anything. So what happens in 2003, 2004, 2005? D20 collapses. Dungeons and Dragons, there's a giant kind of pullback from role-playing games, and the small adventures died almost immediately. That extra expense that publishers were putting into small adventures to keep the brand alive suddenly was too much of an expense to keep the brand alive, so you had to drop it. So what you saw was this evolution of adventures into, and it had kind of already been heading this way, but evolution of adventures into larger books. So you have a 200-page book or a 150-page book that the price tag would be a little bit higher on, but you could still use this thing to keep the brand alive. Much more labor intensive, but again, you had a higher price point. So you saw during that kind of slow period of 05 to 08, 09, the nature of adventures change. There were still a lot of little ones that came out. We, TLG, certainly followed. We continue to do the small ones, but we could do so easily because we have a staff artist. Peter's a staff artist. He works for TROLLZAH Games. That's what he does. So it brought our art cost down, and we owned our own print shop, so it brought our print cost down. So we were able to keep these small adventures alive, even as they were dying out. So as other companies shifted into bigger, more adventure paths, I think the only three of us that kind of stuck to the small ones would be TLG and Frog God. And of course, they went through some major transitions in 08, 09, 010 as they came out with their own game system, and Dungeons & Classics, which also went through some major transitions about that time, as Goodman Games kind of released their setting, because even their adventures had slowed considerably during that kind of slow period. Goodman Games is known for the quality and number of small, 30-page adventures that they were putting in. So once the market changed, you saw the nature, the whole nature of adventures change from these small things like you see here, B1, In Search of the Unknown, and that's, I put that up, that's my favorite of the early editions, early modules, followed only by, see if I can get that up, nope, it has wandered off. Followed only by T1, which I had it loaded, but we are clearly not going to mess with this. There's that one. I don't know on that one up here. That one doesn't matter. Nope, wait, there it is, right there. There we go. That was my second favorite one, T1 adventure, the Village of Hong. But these adventures were small. This kind of set the whole tone for it. Fast forward up to the 08, 09, and adventures had changed into these larger, bigger scopes. So Player Path, I think, is what 5th edition does now. They don't really do small adventures, and you start with your first level and you run it all the way up through 12th or 15th or 10th or whatever it is, and then you go on to a new party or you go on to the next adventure path. So adventures have certainly changed in the way that they're marketed and the way they're sold and their impact on a publishing regimen. For TROLLZAH Games, it hasn't changed that much because of, like I said a few minutes ago, we control so many sources, the source of production, have so much control over the source of production, we can keep costs down and still roll out small adventures. The interesting thing to me, we're kind of seeing this happen now. Even though the small adventure is used in retail shops to support a brand and bring attention to a brand and to show retailers and distributors that the brand still has strength. As that changes and they go into adventure paths, those things are harder to put out, slower to come out just because they're larger and all that business. It's happening at the same time the retail market is actually shrinking markedly. And it, of course, is shrinking because the internet is exploding. So it's interesting to see, how's it going, Snow Quilter? It's interesting to see what's going to happen next, and I think we're actually in the middle of a new shift. I think where before small adventures became uneconomical, so the publishers started putting out larger adventures. Now I think that the small adventures actually have a role to play again because you can put them out on the internet relatively inexpensively, meaning you can minimally cut out your print costs and shipping costs that are involved with all of that. So you can actually help keep a brand alive by putting small adventures out, which is something that TLG certainly does. There's Skulls and Scrap Faggot Green. I talked about Judges Guild a few minutes ago. That was, Judges Guild actually kept themselves alive on adventures for many years and did some insanely great stuff. They kept their costs way down. Print costs weren't very expensive, and like this here, which was my favorite of the early Judges Guild adventures, it really just had a paper. It didn't even have a heavy cardstock cover, so they can, and it's black and white, like you can see. They've done they did all kinds of things to maintain the costs, keep the costs down, so that they can actually stay and play in the marketplace. The problem is adventures only appeal to 1/5 or 1/4 of a game table. So any adventure that comes out, you've already cut the sales pool down by 60 to 70 to 80% of your actual active buyers. So adventures have a huge amount of risk to them. They still have a huge amount of value, but they have a huge amount of risk for publishers. And that's why you see publishers are pretty picky on what they put out, and relatively they gauge what they want to do with an adventure carefully, because they can be very expensive endeavors, and the return on that expense isn't so great. Let's see, what else did I want to jibber jabber about? Does anyone have any questions on anything that I've rambled so far? I feel like I'm just rambling all over the place today. Yeah, that's it. That's just it, Red Dragon. You could get, what's amazing to me, Red Dragon mentioned how they didn't feel, when we were younger back in the 70s and 80s, they didn't feel like they were small. They didn't. When I played G1, the Hill Giant adventure, that thing was monstrous. It was huge. It took us forever to get through that thing, and it was bloody and deadly and all that mess. When you look at the actual published adventure, I think it's 16 pages. And the font's not tiny. I mean, it's probably a 12 font, 11, something like that, and it's got quite a bit of art and maps in it. So on the maps down inside, but yeah, they felt bigger than they were, and I think that, and we can get into that here in a few minutes. The way they did adventures was very different than now. When you look at, and we'll talk about this here in a few minutes, but we'll dive into it. The adventures now seem to be, and certainly from TLG's perspective, seem to be all-encompassing things. They have plot devices and NPCs and background materials and ecology and flora and fauna, and they have so much stuff that's kind of jammed in there. The earlier adventures were pure adventures. That's all they were. Here's the frost giant. You can see it hanging. It's one of my favorite, probably my third favorite adventure. Is what's it called? The frost giant Jarl, or the glacial rift of the frost giant Jarl. Yeah. So fantastic little adventure, but very, very short. But it's crammed full of stuff. Absolutely crammed full of stuff. But not stuff that the GM or the CK or DM or whatever is going to actually use unless they want to, and in that case, they can make it up themselves. So a lot of gaming content, a lot of adventures, a lot of encounters, a lot of treasures, a lot of traps, all wrapped up into a small package. That changes when they go into the Adventure Pass. The problem with the Adventure Pass, if you want to have a 180-page adventure, you go from 16 pages to 180 pages. That's 12,000 words to 150,000 words, and suddenly you've got to put a lot of stuff in there, and that's what it is. And Douglas, a lot of it turns out to be fluff. Not that the fluff is bad. I'm guilty of that myself. So is Davis. You read almost any adventure I write, the first 3 or 4 pages is just going to be fluff. In fact, I had to stop myself. It was getting so bad. Somewhere around 2010, 2011. I made myself cut that out and try to start the adventure with an encounter and put that extraneous stuff in later, so that whoever's running that and whoever's playing it doesn't have to do a 20 or 30-minute session of discussing the fauna of the Darkenfall. So it definitely, the nature of adventure changed as soon as they went to Adventure Pass. But they just had to have more content, and that content's got to come from somewhere. You really can't do 150 pages of one monster after another monster after another monster after another monster. That gets just boring. So and a little silly to boot. And that's also another, side of the market is the market has grown. The customer base is older now. harder for us to have the suspension of disbelief when we're fighting a monster. We kind of want something, you know, most people want something to kind of dive into. But this is Davis's Bear Cult. This is one of our early. This is something we'll dive into next. This is sort of what we began to do, experimenting with, not so much an adventure path, but doing what has come to be called sandbox settings. Now, there was obviously early examples of this, the invincible state of, what is that damn thing called? The something of the invincible overlord, something from Judges Guild. Everybody loves it. It wasn't one of my favorites, but everybody absolutely loves that thing. Something of the invincible overlord. Douglas, you know what it is. Chuck, you've got to know. No place that specializes in market base. Holy things, no good. The city-state of the invincible overlord. Yes, that's it. I knew it was something. All right, yes. But Snow Quilter, you're right. I mean, that's sort of the thing about a lot of the content, and this kind of dives into By Shadow of Night. A lot of the content that comes in the adventure path is readable content, and it does fuel your imagination, and it does all kinds of things that earlier ones didn't. When I went into the Glacial Rift back here, I know there's a white dragon and a Remoraz and some frost giants, and that's about it. That's it, and the rest is just going to be mayhem, treasure, and what have you. But when you dive into something like a sandbox setting, which By Shadow of Night here is, it's one we did way back in 2002, I think is when it came out. And essentially, Davis created the city of Bearcult, and in that city, there's no real set adventure that you're doing. There's dozens of smaller adventures that you can dive into, but there's like 88 or 98, I can't remember the number, NPCs in there that allow the CK, DM, GM, whatever, to go in and take whatever NPCs and have them interact with players and create their own adventures and do all kinds of stuff. So you could literally stay in Bearcult and game in Bearcult for quite a while. I mean, you could have a good dozen games easily set in Bearcult without it disturbing any of the overarching things that you may have in the series of books that Davis eventually wrote. We did this with a number of things: Heart of Glass, City of Koloth, Lost City of Gaxmore, which we'll see in 5th edition here pretty soon. So we had quite a few of these that did that, that explored that whole sandbox thing. Sandbox are probably my favorite as a publisher and as a player. I love them because I rarely do set piece adventures when I run a game, but I love, like Snow Quilter Fun, but I love stuff that fuels my own imagination. So when I've got a sandbox, when I'm reading The Lost City of Gaxmore, it's just mountains of stuff that I can take and utilize in my own game in whatever capacity. So sandboxes are probably my favorite. I like them better than adventure paths. Adventure paths tend to kind of force the GM to make the characters do X, Y, and Z to gain this level and that level to go on to the next section, which is okay. It's the way a lot of people play. That's fine. But for myself personally, I don't care for it so much. Much prefer to have, hands-off adventures and rolling. So with all of that in mind, we can kind of roll into, I'm kind of speeding everything up since we started this insane stream 25 minutes late. Yes, Douglas, I love overland adventures. Absolutely love them. I try to do city adventures every now and again. I just can't. I can envision it, but I just can't. It's too much NPCs to control, too many things, too many variables, I guess. I'm not sure. And dungeons personally, I know lots of people love them, but I just don't like dungeons. They wear me out. I'll do a little bit of 5 rooms, 10 rooms tops, but beyond that, I have no interest in doing it. But that doesn't mean, and ironically that I should say that, probably the biggest gap in TLG's dungeon publishing reservoir is dungeons. I mean, we got adventures. We got tons of adventures, and one dungeon that I can think of. There's lots of little dungeons, scattered throughout. There's probably 2 in Bearcult, and I know that in Assault on Blacktooth Ridge, which is now out in 5th edition and CNC, there's 4 little dungeons, but they're all very small. Most of what Davis and I write, and most of what we publish from Brian Young or whom Casey Christopherson, is overland. There's some dungeons in there, but it's a lot of overland. It's a lot of interactions with NPCs, stuff like that. Assault on Blackwood's Ridge kind of breaks the mold in that it has a little bit of all of that. When Davis wrote that, he just put in, there's the city adventure, there's dungeon adventures, there's overland adventures, there's crossing river adventures, there's all kinds of very small vignettes, I think is what those would be called, kind of jammed into one adventure. So that kind of leads me into what publishers, and I can really only speak for TLG. Obviously, I've talked to other publishers about these subjects, but I can only speak about what we actually are looking for when we're publishing adventures. And these are probably things that you might want to consider when you're kind of putting your adventure together just for yourself and for your table. One of the first things we look for is, and if you're going to try to get published, if you're going to try to put this, write something and put it out anywhere, definitely understand the rule set of the game that you're writing for. That is the first and most valuable thing. I know it sounds kind of crazy to say that, but we get quite a few adventures that they're very good. They're really cool and they're unique, but they don't adhere to C&C hardly at all. And you can tell where they tried to hybrid it. They read a little bit online or something and took their adventure that they had written, the 4th edition or whatever, and changed it into C&C, and it didn't quite work. And that's one thing as a publisher I don't want to have to do. I don't want to have to go in and rewrite an adventure that's been submitted for our game when it clearly is for another game. It's too exhausting and too much room for error. So usually anything that comes in that looks a little bit unclear, we'll politely reject it and send it back down from whence it came. The next thing in adventures, and this is something that works pretty well, I think, at the table as much as it does trying to get published, is have a very concise opening. When you put the adventure together, understand what levels you want it to be for, understand what characters are necessary to play in this adventure. Basically the who, the where, the what, the how. Get all of these things answered in like 2 paragraphs with no hyperbole, just raw information. It's a good thing to know that before you launch into your convention game or whatever, so you know exactly what's needed to actually run the game, and what the publisher and or the audience can expect coming forward. When will the third-party guidelines be available? Not sure. We are still knocking down a couple of doors here that will not yield. Once that's done, Tim and I'll be able to get a better handle of what needs to be finished, and that's largely the Capital Pen Crusade Classic box set. We're still rolling those 4 months later, still rolling those out the door. It has been an entertaining Kickstarter, to say the least. Yeah, we will get those up and out. Okay, so Tim's actually on top of that. Excellent. Tim's been working on it, so maybe we'll see that up and on the website pretty soon. So anyway, once you get your kind of concise opening, follow that up with a very clear idea. And this is what I try to tell people when they're submitting an adventure to us. What I try to tell people is your first 2 paragraphs should be the who, what, how, when, and they should be very short. The third paragraph should basically be the back cover text, what we call the ad copy. If I can read that third paragraph and it reads, it doesn't have to be exactly like ad copy, but it tells me everything that's going on in that adventure, what the conflict is. All of that stuff, not revealing treasure, not revealing any secret red herrings or any of that stuff, but this is the adventure, this is the thing. If I can read that in 1 paragraph, then I'll know what's coming up. I'll know as a publisher if we need that, in the stable, or if we don't. And the nice thing is, once I read that, if it's pretty concise, when it comes time to actually promote, put the thing out, I don't have to go back through and read the entire module and try to pick out the cool aspects of it, the cool name, or the druid that does X. I've already got that covered. It's already in that small little opening idea. So that's really on your third paragraph before your introduction to the adventure begins. try to cover that. Try to give us a good idea of what's going on. And if you need an idea of ad copy, you can go to any adventure on our site, and you're going to see it kind of up there. Some of the older ones, it's a little bit rougher than some of the newer ones, but we try to get everything, kind of the selling points of the module, the interesting parts of the module out there quickly, so that the reader can know what's going on, and the same principle applies for the publisher. I want to know what's going on very quickly. If this is a super high-level adventure that's going to involve all kinds of mega elves that are riding mechanical dragons, I need to know that so that I can reject it, because that's not going to go in the world of Arid. So don't put anything mechanical. If you submit, don't put anything mechanical in a fantasy module. That maybe a blunderbuss or whatever those guns are called from the ancient days. But so you definitely have a clear idea of what you want to do. State it very, very clearly. When you're submitting to us, we actually just look for about 3 pages. I don't need the whole adventure. You don't even have to have it written. I don't care about any of that. Send in these first 3, concise idea of what's going on. Give me a clear idea of an arquebus. There you go. Wasn't there one called like a blunderbuss? A huge one. I think you're right. I think it's the arquebus. But get a concise idea of what's going on. Give me a clear idea of what I'm buying or what we're going to be publishing. And then in the module itself, try to go linear. Write it in a linear fashion. Don't do that writing, play, acting, whatever technique where you start the story in the middle and all of that. Don't do that. Just begin the adventure. This is where we begin. This is where we're going. This is what we encounter, and at the end of it. There's a blunderbuss. That's what it is. What a silly word. Who came up with that word? It's got to be an Englishman that came up with the word blunderbuss. There you go. I know there's something out there in my scant knowledge of ancient firearms. Now, in the actual body of the adventure, what I always, that's exactly right, an early shotgun. What I always try to tell people is try something unique. I remember when I first started this, and I was pitching an RPG to one of my distributor friends. He kept just doing this, super great guy, but really sarcastic, love him to death, all of the acting. He kept doing this, and he kept doing this, and he goes, okay, so what's unique about it? What's different than what's already out there? Because at the end of the day, that idea, that unique idea is going to sell it. It's either going to sell it at the table to the players, it's also going to sell it to the publisher, and it's going to sell it to the fans of the game. So try to come up with something unique. Try to take old ideas, put a twist on them, whatever it is. I noticed playing to another point I'm going to have in a minute is using visuals for inspiration. We're doing some high-level stuff in my Thursday night game, and they're going to this huge kind of castle. Peter and I are actually working on it for a TLV publication. I'm going to test play it at the table, but I was trying to envision what I wanted in it. I wanted something different. I wanted something that we hadn't done before that kind of, surprised everybody. So I sat back and just started looking at stuff on YouTube. It's probably the most value I get out of that, besides weird music, is just listening, just watching stuff on YouTube. I watched a whole bunch of odd and end music videos that just, interesting visuals and stuff like that. And then I hit these new trailers, and I started watching new trailers, and I watched the new trailer for the movie, let me mix this up. It's Gretel and Hansel. The original story is called Hansel and Gretel. This one's called Gretel and Hansel. And when I clicked on it, watched it, and you should definitely check it out. I don't know if that movie is your cup of tea, but and I don't normally go into for horror movies, but that thing, the visuals on that are absolutely breathtaking, astounding, mysterious, dark without being dark. We all know about the Dark Forest. It's been done 12 gazillion times. I've done it 12 gazillion times. But there's something about the forest in Gretel and Hansel that is different. I don't know what it is. The way they shot it, the way, whatever, the director did, from what I've seen. Now, obviously, I've only seen the trailer. It's supposed to be out like it's not. But there's a lot of visuals, and I immediately had a lot of ideas. Instantly had a lot of ideas what I want to do in my Thursday night game, what I want to do in this module that Peter and I will eventually publish once he gets the math done. So look for inspiration from anywhere and try to come up with unique ideas. And it doesn't mean you have to reinvent the horse. One of our best-selling adventures that we've ever done, reinvent the wheel, not the horse. I don't think anyone invented the horse. one of the best-selling adventures we've ever done is 𝚃𝚘𝚕𝚕, 𝚃𝚘𝚕𝚔, Power of the Dog, is that what it was called? Descent in the Unknown. Whatever it is. The main title is 𝚃𝚘𝚕𝚔. I don't have that out. It's actually the prelude to By Shadow of Night. But that adventure is essentially, at its core, if you boil all the fat off of it, that adventure is rescuing a princess. It doesn't look like that. I played it way back in 01 or 02 when Davis first conceived the adventure. I really didn't recognize it as a rescue the princess adventure until years later when we were doing a third or fourth printing of it, and Davis and I were talking about it. And I think I made a comment about, we don't ever rescue anybody. He said, what are you talking about? That's essentially, 𝚃𝚘𝚕𝚔 is the classic rescue the princess. And I went back and I looked at it and I said, oh yeah, that is. Because the conflict in that adventure, is really around a tower. It's the Tower of the Dog. So that the princess you're rescuing, she's not really a princess. She's the daughter of a merchant, and you're rescuing her father and her. Or you're really not, you may be rescuing them. You may not. You may find yourself in conflict with them. But the conflict is around that tower and the raiders that are coming in, so that she becomes secondary to the story that you're playing through. And it was, once I realized that, I thought, well, now that is a fantastic twist on an old thing. So you can definitely take old things, rework them as clearly Gretel and Hansel, and look at the trailer. If you take a moment to look at it, clearly has done by just taking this story of these two knuckleheads who get traipsing off in the woods and throwing breadcrumbs down and get lost and end up at a witch's house with the candy and the eating and all of that stuff. Man, if I could do a good Bill Cosby, that would have been perfect. With the candy and the eating, I can't do Bill Cosby. But at any rate, yeah, so take any kind of idea that you have and give it a little bit of a twist. Another great example of that, and this is, it catapulted into one of my favorite adventures. And I never actually played it all the way through. I played it about halfway through. But Gary Gygax wrote one for us called The Hermit. He put it out as a Legendary Adventures and as a D20 Dungeons & Dragons adventure. And when I was reading through that for its final edit before we went to layout, there's a section in which and some of you probably heard me talk about it, there's a section in which he describes all of this weird monsters above you floating through the air, and I had to read it twice to realize what he was doing. And essentially, your characters are at the bottom of a pond looking up. And I thought, when I read that, I thought, that is so freaking awesome. I mean, that it's something I had never thought of I've been gaming for decades and had never thought of that perspective of showing the players or bringing the players into a world from a completely and utterly different perspective at the bottom of a pond looking up at fish swimming around in the sky or what have you. So it's just a good way of taking something new, a water adventure, and doing a complete twist on it, so there's something a little bit new. So when you're writing an adventure and submitting it to whomsoever it is, be concise, and let them know exactly what they're getting, let them know exactly what they're going to be using in it to market it, to sell it, and when they actually have it, give the publisher, much like you would want to give your players at the table, give them something that hasn't been done before, or if it has, that you've taken a kind of a new and unique twist on the whole thing, and put your own imprint on it, so that when it comes out, it leaves that mark on the game. They remember it. They remember what happened in it and what's going on. I think that's about it. I felt a little rushed, but does anyone have any questions? Anyone have any commentary on either the place of adventures in the marketplace, or in submitting adventures, or even in writing your own adventures as you're setting them up for your table? I'll be happy to field any questions or discuss any commentary. I think that's about it. Tim and Chuck? All right, well, I think that, let me do a quick, with no questions, let me do a quick recap of where we are and what we're going to do. We should, that Classics and Crusade, Castles and Crusade Classic box set, we should have it done this week. It should be all of the final bits and pieces gone to the backers, and we can sign off on that one. We've got the Memorial Tomb that we're hammering out pretty good. I'm going to get with Benoit. He sent me a bunch of stuff, so I haven't had a chance to go through it. And that's at editing as well. So That's moving along down the pipe, but I got to see what he sent us. I think it's more maps. Someone had pointed out there's a bunch more maps. So those are coming out. The Egyptian Codex, Codex Egyptium, got it. Edits going in, so that's rolling forward. Everything's kind of moving forward, doing the wrap-up on the submission for Gaxmore. Everything's looking pretty good as we tumble along and into this, second week, third week, I don't know, 12th week of feels like it's an eternity. It's been 2020 already. But we will do Jim's Tricks of the Trade either today or tomorrow, and that'll come out, and we'll do presumably, if we can get on, we're going to do the stream on Thursday at 2. No, at 1. Thursday at 1. So if we're back to Starship Warden at 1 level, there'll be a chance to upgrade. Absolutely, Epi. That'll go to Backer Kit at some point. We got a few in line before that, but when that goes to Backer Kit, you'll be able to adjust your pledge levels at that point. The sweet Corinthian leather. Have you ever seen that the interview with him where there's no such thing as Corinthian leather? It's great. That's read above from me. Let's see. When you get done on Kickstarter stuff, mention the World Anvil, and that will be trying to do it. Okay. Do you know? Okay, yeah. So Tim and crew have been diligently working on World Anvil, uploading all kinds of material to it. I think they've finally worked out a method that they're going to do, so you'll see more material go up even faster. Go to worldanvil.com. It's probably in the stream somewhere, but definitely check that out. And I believe we got a new Twitch stream coming out on World Anvil as well. Tim will be hopping on and discussing things. Do we have a time on that? I'm not sure if we got a time set aside for that, but if not, it'll be sometime next week. We'll send out an announcement, of course, and let everybody know so you can see where we are. We are going into that World Anvil full bore. So with a little bit of luck, we'll see just mountains of that material up there by the end of the month and into February. Lots of it already coming up, lots going on. Tim is something of a vampire. He gets up about 4 in the morning, 3 in the morning, and starts working and does his routine when, the world actually wakes up. But he and Davis both get up before the sun comes up and work. Davis was texting me at 3:30 this morning about the NPC Almanac. I was sound asleep. The phone kept about to throw that thing in the dumpster, but yeah, there you go. All right, so we got Jim's Tricks of the Trade Thursday, and we've got World Anvil stream next week, and of course, Babunski, our very own Chuck, has moved a lot of his games over to the Troll Lord stream, so definitely check those out. He ran Haunted Highlands, I think, this past weekend, so check the schedule out. We're gearing this channel up more to get more stuff on there. I think that's it for me. Thank you, everybody, for wandering by, and I promise next week will be a little bit more organized. I'll at least know to check the stream key or whatever that thing's called. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day, and we will see you on Thursday, hopefully, for Jim's Tricks of the Trade. Take it easy, y'all.